Hello, I run a page called Sane in the Asylum, which I started after an attempt, and then it has slowly morphed into becoming about my journey through my mental health journey. So today I'm going to talk about the second part of my mental health journey, also pre-attempt. And I'm going to be drinking my green tea today while I do that. So I think in the last video, I made it to after I'd had my son. He was probably going on 1 or 2. And if you recall, I had 2 friends in high school. I had 2 friends. I had one that I had since middle school, or maybe I had known them both since middle school, but I had a closer friend that I had since middle school. And then I had a friend that I became closer to after my grandfather died, which my grandfather died my freshman year of high school, or at the end of my freshman year. So sophomore year, I was a lot closer to this friend than I was to my other friend. But neither one of these friends really knew the exact depths of the situation I was coming from or the home life that I had. They didn't. Neither one of them knew the extent. So even after I left, they didn't know about it. My friend that I became closer to after my grandfather died, she actually left school and transferred to another school, and we were friends for a while after that, but then we lost contact slowly. And then my other friend, which was the friend that I had for a longer period of time, that I was closer to for a longer period of time, we stopped being friends after I moved out of my house, and I started living on my own. And I was going through that rough period of time after I transitioned from my home life and I was free for the first time. Our friendship ended shortly before I dropped out of high school. So at this point in my journey, I didn't have any friends, and though I had kind of maintained contact after dropping out, I had sort of reached out to let everybody know that I was having a baby, and they both kind of came back in like a very limited sort of way. They sent gifts, and that was pretty much it until it was not a couple of years later, till about, I don't know, a year later, I got back into contact with the friend that I was closer to after my grandfather died. And we were both at sort of like a standstill kind of part of our lives. She was in college and I had a toddler, and we ended up spending a lot more time together around that period of time. And we both went back to a old high school club that we had attended together, which wasn't weird. That high school teacher had a lot of old students return to them. And so we spent like probably a couple of years going to this old high school club together and sort of just spending this weird time. We were both kind of uprooted. Or maybe not, I wasn't necessarily uprooted. I was just getting settled into a situation. But we were both kind of at that period of time where we weren't really going into any direction specifically. So this was actually kind of a wonderful time for my mental health because I had this friend that was coming around regularly, and we were going out to do stuff. I was getting out of the house and getting exercise in and having like a social routine. And I will forever be grateful to this friend for that period of time. Even if we are no longer friends, I will forever be grateful, because if I had not had her in that period of time, I don't think I would have had that uptick in like my mental health that allowed me to sort of develop this foundation that I've revisited later on when I was alone and when I didn't have those social outlets anymore. So we'll forever be grateful for that. But around this time, I was in limited contact with both of these friends. More regular contact with the one friend, but limited contact with the other friend. And I was around her parents in a very limited sort of way. But at this point, still, neither one of them knew exactly the situation that I had come from, because I had at this point left that situation and also left my place that I lived when I first left my home. the first place that I lived alone. And then I was with my partner, who I had my son with. So I had been with this partner for a couple of years at that point, and I was pretty situated in that environment. So there was no real need to bring up my old life with anybody. I just kind of was moving forward with my new life, and nobody really questioned it. And anybody who would have questioned it hadn't really been there during the more intense portions of my childhood. So nobody really did question anything that I was coming from. So during this period of time, I was very routine. I was exercising, I was going out, I was hanging out with a friend, and I was accomplishing things. But also in between time when I wasn't doing that, I was growing things. I was listening to various materials that provided me insight into my childhood and some of the things that I was experiencing and trauma and other mental health issues. So I was doing very well. And I was finally starting to feel a little bit, stable. I think I was starting to feel stable. And I was starting to look into alternative ways to deal with things like anxiety and depression that I was experiencing on occasion. Or maybe I was thinking about the future when I was going to start experiencing the depression again, because the depression had come and went my whole childhood from the time that I was really young. I've always had depression that comes and goes. And as I've gotten older, actually, that depression when I was younger, it would come in like shorter increments, and then it would go, and then it would come and stay a little longer, and then it would go. But as I've gotten older, these periods of depression have gotten so much longer and more intense before there's a break into a lesser happiness or just calmness. I wouldn't necessarily say it's complete happiness, but maybe it's just not depression. Just like a plateau. So I started looking into some herbal supplements and ways and diet changes and trying out new things to help me deal with these things. And I think the first one that I tried out was something called Kava Kava. And it was like a loose leaf herbal tea powder, and you had to prepare it in a very specific way. Apparently it was like one of those ceremonial things that you do with other people, and you use cheesecloth. And anyways, I remember taking it, and it made my lips numb, which it's supposed to, and it made me feel very calm, and I did enjoy it. Eventually I switched to capsules, and I started taking those, and they worked pretty well. But that was just one of the many things that I tried. I started trying smoothies and taking daily walks. And I started trying to journal for the very first time, but I just could never get down the writing. Even in school, I would sit and I would try to write things out. And I would just get so panicked that nothing would come out, or anything that would come out was not coherent or cohesive. It didn't string together nicely at all. It was very jumbled. And I couldn't ever, if I had an idea, a central idea, I could never get to that central idea or anything surrounding it in any uniform way. It just wouldn't work for me. And so I'd get so anxious, and I would shut down, I'd walk away from it. And then I would try to cram and do it the night before, and it just wasn't working. So for the first time, I had tried to revisit that avenue of maybe that being an outlet for some of the traumatic memories that were coming back to me, because I was being plagued with a lot of traumatic memories coming back to me at this point. And I think it's because my life was going so well, and because I had this friendship. But also, it might have been because I was literally taking a walk back into the past. Almost exactly, that's what I was doing. So that might have been the reason why all those boxes were opening up and why all those memories were coming back to me at that point. So around this time, my stepfather reached out to me. When my life was going great and everything was calm, my stepfather reaches out to me which I would have never actually talked to him, but I hadn't talked to my mom in a while. It had been right after my son was born, had been kind of the last time I had really had an interaction with her. So I started talking to him because I was worried about my siblings, who I hadn't really also had contact with for a while. And he told me something that disturbed me a lot. And it was that our old house, because of some issues that they had had in their relationship, which they always had issues that escalated quickly, but this was different. They were having issues in their relationship, and my mother had taken the children and had got them together to completely trash the house that we lived in, the rental property that we were living in when I left home. And he sent me these photographs with trash literally strewn about every room of the house that I had spent the last 5 years that I was at home in. And every room, every piece of furniture completely ripped to shreds and defiled in very disgusting ways. The walls were painted with various bodily fluids, and it was just a very eerie and scary thing to look at. Because my mother had always been a little bit crazy. Well, crazy is the word that I'm going to use, but it's more than that. And not necessarily as derogatory as the word that I'm using, but she'd always been kind of out there, and she'd always had this way of doing things that just were not good, but she had never reached that level. And so when I saw that, it really scared me. And so I started trying to track down my siblings, because at this point, my mother had left them each with different people. I would find out after reaching out to my sister. So they were all in different places at this point. So when I reached out to my sister who was about 15, going on 16, she was staying with a boyfriend that she had gotten a year back. And I was a little bit shocked by that. But apparently my mom had left my stepdad by going to move in with my sister's boyfriend's parents. And she and all the kids have been staying there. And eventually she left with the boys and left my sister there. And the boys had ended up staying with a school counselor or something like that. I don't exactly remember how it was told to me that they had gotten into contact, but my mother left my two younger brothers with somebody completely separate, and she was a counselor of some sort. So I ended up tracking down my sister and going to talk to her in person. And then I found out about my brothers. And then I went and tracked down the woman that they were with, and I went to go see them. But I couldn't figure out where my mother was. I had no clue where she was. So after I tracked down the boys, I went and I visited with them. But it didn't really go anywhere. They were talking about that my mother had visited every now and again, and they were talking about some guardianship issues. And with my sister, the people that she was staying with were talking about getting guardianship of her, because she'd already been there for a while, and she was with their son, and they were always together. So I started having my sister come to my house every now and again, because I just wanted to see her, and I wanted to make sure she was doing okay. But also, without my mother around, it was fine for her to come and visit me without it being too much of an issue. But shortly thereafter, she was pregnant with her first child, and something happened to where in all this mix, I ended up not hanging out with that friend anymore, because she didn't want to go to the place that we were originally hanging out. She was done doing that, but also she was getting busy with college, so and other things in her life. So we stopped hanging out as much, and after my sister got pregnant, she wasn't coming around as much. She was around towards, mid-late pregnancy, but then after that, she wasn't really around anymore. And it was around this time that I ran into the boy from my childhood that assaulted me. And I was in the worst episode of PTSD of my life. And that was where I kind of lost all my progress. Every bit of progress that I had made, all these things coming together, just completely derailed me. And I didn't have the proper coping mechanisms in place to actually keep it together. And so I really did kind of lose it for a while. I mean, there was guilt that I had left my family. My parents, or my mother and my stepdad, they were both heavy drug users at that period of time, or at that point in time. I'd kind of lost all the things that I set in place that were helping me do better. And that's my own fault because I didn't have other coping mechanisms in place during that period of time. And I just kind of got overwhelmed by it. And nobody really knew what my origin situation was like. So I couldn't necessarily reach out and say, without giving away all those things that I had hid all those years. So I just kind of collapsed in overwhelm, and I had a few years where some things I remember, some things are a little bit foggy, but this is the end of part 2 of my mental health journey. Thank you.